These are the 4.5 notes for Algebra 2. We're going to talk about finding the zeros today, if you are given either a factor or a zero. So we'll just take a couple little notes here up at the top to help you remember what to do. If you are given the zero, you are going to use it. Meaning you're going to keep it exactly like it is, not change the sign at all, just use the number. If you're given a factor, you're going to change it. So for example, on problem number 1, -5, they give you your zero. You're going to use it, -5. But on example number 2, x plus 3, so the factors always come in the form x plus something or x minus something. So we're going to change that to a -3. There's one other notation I want to make use of. If it says f of 5 equals 0, that 5 right there is the zero that you want to use. That's them giving you the zero in function notation. You'll see that a lot on Delta Math. Okay, so one more time. If you're given the zero, use it. If you're given a factor, change the sign. And if they give you f of 5 or f of any number, that's going to be the zero that we use. Let's look at example number 1. -5 is a zero. Find all the other zeros. We know there's going to be 3 zeros because it says x to the third. We know one of them is -5. So we'll start off by putting the -5 on the outside. We'll do synthetic division. Line up your coefficients. 1 is in front of the x to the third. 1 is in front of the x squared. -32 is in front of the x. And -60 is at the end. Bring down the 1, or whatever number comes first there. And remember, you alternate between multiplying and adding. So you multiply -5 times 1 to get -5. Then you add 1 and -5 to get -4. Multiply -5 times -4, 20. And add to get -12. Multiply one more time, -5 times -12 gets us 60, and add those to get 0. We want to make sure we get 0 at the end because they told us this is a 0, which means -5 should result in an answer of 0. Then what we do is we take what's left. We're going to write what we call, remember, the depressed equation, and we're going to write this as one exponent lower than what we started with. So we're putting it back into the x form. So the 1 comes in front of the x squared, -4 comes in front of the x, and -12 is the regular number by itself. And we set that equal to 0. Now most of the time we don't write a 1 in front, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that 1 right there. And then what I need to do is factor, which means I need to look for 2 numbers that will, and I'm going to shorten this, multiply, m for multiply, to -12, and add to -4. Multiply to -12 and add to -4. That's going to be 6 and 2. The 6 will have to be negative. The 2 will have to be a positive. And then I would solve. So I'll set each one of those equal to 0. And I can solve it out. You probably remember that at the end here, you're just going to end up changing the signs. So if you want to do this part in your head, that's fine too. So therefore, my 3 answers are -5, this one that I got at the very beginning, 6, and -2. And those become my 3 answers, or my 3 zeros. Remember, zeros and answers mean the same thing. All right, example number 2. So on this one, they gave us the factor. And so we change it to a -3. Always change the sign of that one. You could also bring it to the side like this and set it equal to 0. That's how you're getting that -3 instead. It's just like what we did at the end of the last problem. All right, so then we set this up. We'll put the -3, the 0 on the outside. Then we'll line up our coefficients, the numbers in front. 1 is in front of the x to the third. 9, 23, and 15. Bring down the 1, multiply, and add. Multiply -3 times 6, -18, and then add 23 plus -18 gets me 5. Then multiply the outside number times the bottom number, -15, and add the inside numbers together to make your 0. We're expecting a 0 because they told us that -3 was one of our zeros. X plus 3 is a factor. So we're expecting to get that 0. We'll write the depressed equation, which is just this, back into its x form. 1x to the third. Sorry, always drop the exponent. I forgot about that. 1x to the second plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. And again, we never write the 1 in front of the x squared, so I'll take that away. And next up is to factor. Looking for numbers that multiply to 5 and add to 6. Those numbers are going to be 5 and 1. Both of my signs will be positive. And then I set each one equal to 0 and I solve. If you don't have to do that step and just can write out your answers, that's perfectly fine. Otherwise, just solve this little equation to get your 2 answers. All right, so we have our original answer of -3. That's from up here. Then we have -5, and we have -1. And there's your 3 answers, or your 3 zeros. Let's look to the back side. On the back, again, they tell you it a little bit differently. They're using this, which is what we call function notation. X minus 1 is a factor. So remember, if you're given the factor, you have to change it. So we're going to take this x minus 1 and change it to +1. Again, what you're really doing is solving this very tiny equation. X equals 1. And then find all the zeros of the f of x algebraically. Algebraically is just the same thing we've been working on. It's just the term they happen to use. Let's get the coefficients. 1, -1, -16, and 16. Drop down the 1. And remember, you alternate between multiplying the outside and the bottom, and then adding on the inside. So multiply, add, multiply, which gets me 0, and add, multiply, and add. So again, I get that 0, which is what I wanted. Now I'll take it and write the depressed equation. 1x squared plus 0x minus 16 equals 0. Let's write this in a format that we're used to. We don't put the 1 out front, so I'll get rid of that. And also 0x doesn't mean anything. 0 is nothing, so let's get rid of that too. So what I really have is x squared minus 16. Instead of factoring this one, I'm going to solve it. I'm going to move my 16 to the other side, add it, bring down x squared equals 16. Then I'll solve that by square rooting it. When I square root, I do need a plus or minus sign. And I'll put plus and minus 4. So if I wanted to make a list of my final answers, I would have the 1 from the beginning, that one up there, as well as +4 and -4. Those are, again, what we call the zeros, which is just another word for answers. All right, example 4 is pretty similar. Take some time, see if you can work a little bit ahead of the video. Since they give us a factor, we'll use the 8 on the outside. And I'll do this one with a little bit less explanation so you can try some of them on your own. I'll go nice and slow, try to work ahead of me. So our final list of answers is the 8 from the very beginning, as well as the positive 3 and the negative 3. Those are my zeros. All right, one other thing I want to talk to you guys about. It's going to be very similar to problems 3 and 4. It's just that at the end, we're going to have one tiny little thing to worry about. So let's look at example number 5. Notice here that right there, this little section, that's what we were talking about in the very beginning. So if you flip it back over to the first page, you'll notice that we kind of set you guys up for that right here. And that's going to come into play on example number 5. That number inside the parentheses is going to be the 0. So for this problem, the -1 is going to be the 0, which means already you know one of the answers for this problem. Right. So you're going to put the -1 on the outside. You'll line up the coefficients, 1, 1, 25, 25. And you do synthetic division. Bring down the 1, multiply the outside number times the bottom, and then add the inside numbers to get 0. Multiply the outside number, -1 times 0, which gets you 0. And then add those together. 25 plus 0 is 25. Multiply and add. So let's see if instead of writing out the 1 and the 0, we can just kind of shortcut this. Remember, the 1x squared, I don't really need the 1 in front. The 0x, I can just skip over because I'm going to end up scratching it out anyway. And I'll just bring down the plus 25. It's the same thing as we were doing before, except I'm just kind of shortcutting that. And then we'll solve it. Move the 25 to the other side by subtracting. And then square root both sides. This time, however, when we square root both sides, we are square rooting a negative. And when you square root a negative, you have to put an I. Put I's when you square root a negative. Put an I anytime you square root a negative. So to write your final list of answers, you'll have -1, positive 5i, and negative 5i. Remember, I is an imaginary number, and it's used anytime you try to square root a negative number, because technically you can't do it. So they say it's an imaginary number. All right, one last one. Notice again, they gave you that 10 right there. That's going to be the 0. So 10 would go on the outside. I'll do this one quietly. Try to work ahead, and then check your work. So our final list of answers should be 10, positive 2i, and negative 2i. Good work.